Welcome to WooEnglish. In this story, you'll learn English through clear and simple sentences. We encourage you to write comments and share your thoughts. If you enjoy the story, please press the like button to reward us. It really helps us out. Remember, the purpose of this story is educational. We want to help you improve your English while enjoying an exciting tale. We do not encourage or glorify the actions of the characters involved. Let's begin the journey together. Chapter 1. A New Adventure. Lemuel Gulliver was born in Nottinghamshire, England. He was a curious boy who loved to read about faraway lands and adventures. His father, a small farmer, encouraged him to learn as much as he could. Gulliver studied hard and went to college in Cambridge. There he learned many subjects, but he was most interested in medicine and navigation. After college, Gulliver worked as an apprentice for a famous surgeon in London. He learned how to help people who were sick or injured. But Gulliver was not satisfied. He wanted to see the world. He dreamed of travelling to distant places and meeting new people. His dream came true when he became a ship's doctor. Gulliver's first voyage began on a sunny day in May. He joined the ship Antelope as its doctor. The captain and crew were friendly, and they all hoped for a successful journey. The ship was heading to the East Indies, a group of islands known for their spices and treasures. As they sailed, Gulliver marvelled at the beauty of the sea. The blue water stretched as far as he could see, and the sky was clear and bright. He spent his days taking care of the crew and studying his books. At night, he would gaze at the stars, dreaming of the adventures that awaited him. One evening, as they sailed through calm waters, a terrible storm suddenly struck. The sky turned dark, and the wind howled like a wild beast. Huge waves crashed against the ship, tossing it around like a toy. The crew worked hard to keep the ship afloat, but the storm was too strong. The Antelope was thrown onto a rocky shore and broken into pieces. Gulliver and a few other sailors managed to reach the shore. Exhausted and soaked, they collapsed on the sand. When Gulliver woke up, he found himself alone. He tried to stand, but his arms and legs were tied down. He looked around and saw tiny people, no bigger than his thumb, walking on his chest. They were dressed in strange clothes and carried tiny bows and arrows. "Where am I?" Gulliver wondered. He tried to speak, but the tiny people shouted in a language he could not understand. They looked scared, but determined. Gulliver lay still, not wanting to frighten them. After a while, a tiny man who seemed to be their leader climbed onto Gulliver's chest. He spoke in a loud, clear voice. Although Gulliver could not understand the words, he could see that the leader was giving orders. The tiny people brought small ladders and climbed down to the ground. They untied Gulliver's arms and legs, but they made sure he could not move too quickly. Gulliver realized he was in a strange and wonderful land. The tiny people, who called themselves Lilliputians, treated him kindly. They gave him food and water, and they tried to talk to him. Gulliver used gestures to show that he meant no harm. Slowly, they began to trust him. As Gulliver lay there, he felt a mix of excitement and curiosity. He had always dreamed of adventure, and now he was living it. This was just the beginning of his incredible journey. Chapter 2. The Land of Lilliput. When Lemuel Gulliver woke up, he was lying on the soft grass, feeling confused and tired. The last thing he remembered was the terrible storm that wrecked his ship. Now he found himself in a strange land with tiny people all around him. These tiny people were called Lilliputians, and they were no taller than 6 inches. The Lilliputians were curious but cautious. They spoke in a language Gulliver did not understand. They dressed in colourful clothes and wore hats with feathers. Their tiny horses and carriages moved quickly around Gulliver as he lay on the ground. Despite their small size, they were very organised and disciplined. The leader of the Lilliputians, a man named Reldresal, approached Gulliver. He spoke to Gulliver with authority, but also with kindness. Although Gulliver couldn't understand the words, he sensed that Reldresal was welcoming him. Gulliver smiled and nodded, trying to show that he meant no harm. The Lilliputians decided to take Gulliver to their capital city. They made a special cart big enough to carry him. Hundreds of tiny horses pulled the cart, and the journey took several hours. Gulliver was amazed by the beautiful scenery. The fields were green and filled with flowers. The rivers sparkled under the sun, and the hills were dotted with small houses. When they reached the city, Gulliver saw tiny buildings, shops and markets. The streets were filled with Lilliputians going about their daily lives. They stared at Gulliver with wide eyes, whispering to each other. Some children laughed and pointed at the giant man in the cart. The Emperor of Lilliput lived in a magnificent palace with tall towers and golden gates. The palace gardens were full of colourful flowers and fountains. Gulliver was brought before the Emperor, who wore a robe of purple silk and a crown of jewels. The Emperor's face was kind but curious. He looked at Gulliver and spoke in a commanding voice. Reldresal translated the Emperor's words into simple gestures and expressions. The Emperor welcomed Gulliver to Lilliput and promised him food and shelter. In return, he asked Gulliver to help the Lilliputians with their problems. Gulliver agreed, eager to learn more about this fascinating land and its people. Gulliver was given a large temple to live in. The temple was no longer in use, so it was perfect for a man of his size. The Lilliputians provided him with food and drink. They baked hundreds of tiny loaves of bread and cooked pots of stew just for him. Gulliver was grateful and tried to be a good guest. As Gulliver spent more time in Lilliput, he learned about their customs and traditions. The Lilliputians valued honesty and hard work. They celebrated many festivals with music, dancing, and feasts. One of their most important traditions was the rope dancing competition. Skilled dancers performed amazing tricks on a thin rope stretched high above the ground. The winner received a blue ribbon and great honor. Gulliver also learned about the political conflicts in Lilliput. They were at war with their neighboring island, Blefuscu. The cause of the war was a disagreement over how to break eggs. The Lilliputians believed eggs should be broken at the small end, while the people of Blefuscu insisted on breaking them at the big end. This disagreement had led to many battles and much suffering. Gulliver realized that even in this tiny land, people had big problems. He wanted to help the Lilliputians find peace and live happily. As he lay in his temple that night, he felt a sense of purpose. His adventure in Lilliput had just begun, and he was ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 3. Making Friends. Gulliver had been in Lilliput for a few weeks, and he was beginning to feel at home. The Lilliputians were no longer afraid of him, and many even started to befriend him. One of his closest friends was Reldresal, the leader who had first spoken to him. Reldresal visited Gulliver every day and taught him the Lilliputian language. Gulliver learned quickly and was soon able to understand and speak basic phrases. One morning, Reldresal came to see Gulliver with a serious look on his face. He explained that Lilliput was in danger. Their enemy, Blefuscu, was planning an attack. The conflict between Lilliput and Blefuscu had been going on for years. The two islands disagreed over a very simple thing: how to break an egg. The Lilliputians believed in breaking eggs at the small end, while the people of Blefuscu broke theirs at the big end. This disagreement had led to many wars and much suffering. Reldresal asked Gulliver if he would help defend Lilliput. Gulliver agreed, wanting to show his gratitude to his new friends. The Emperor of Lilliput called a meeting with his council to discuss the plan. Gulliver attended the meeting, feeling very important. The Emperor explained that Blefuscu's navy was preparing to invade. They needed a strong defense to protect their land. Gulliver suggested a daring plan. He offered to wade across the channel between Lilliput and Blefuscu and capture the enemy's fleet. The Emperor and his council were amazed by Gulliver's bravery and strength. They agreed to let him try. The next morning, Gulliver set out for Blefuscu. The Lilliputians cheered for him as he walked into the sea. The water was shallow, only coming up to his waist. Gulliver reached Blefuscu's harbour and saw the enemy ships lined up, ready for battle. He took a long rope and tied it around the ships, linking them together. The Blefuscudians were shocked and tried to stop him with their tiny arrows, but they were no match for Gulliver's size and strength. With a great effort, Gulliver pulled the entire fleet back to Lilliput. The Lilliputians celebrated his success with music, dancing, and a grand feast. The Emperor declared Gulliver a hero and awarded him the title of Nardak, the highest honour in Lilliput. Gulliver's bravery earned him the trust and friendship of the Lilliputians. He was invited to many homes and learned more about their culture and politics. Despite their small size, the Lilliputians had complex political systems and rivalries. Gulliver found their customs fascinating and sometimes amusing. However, not everyone in Lilliput was happy with Gulliver's growing influence. Some ministers were jealous of his friendship with the Emperor and saw him as a threat. They plotted against him, spreading rumours and lies. Gulliver knew he had to be careful and stay loyal to his true friends. Reldresal warned Gulliver about the dangers of politics in Lilliput. He explained that alliances could change quickly, and trust was fragile. Gulliver took this advice to heart and decided to use his strength and size for good. He helped the Lilliputians rebuild their defences and worked to bring peace between Lilliput and Blefuscu. Gulliver's efforts paid off. He managed to broker a truce between the two islands, convincing them that their differences were small compared to the benefits of peace. The Lilliputians admired Gulliver's wisdom and courage. He had not only earned their trust, but also helped them find a way to live in harmony. As Gulliver lay in his temple that night, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had made true friends in Lilliput and had played a part in ending a long and pointless conflict. His adventure in this tiny land was far from over, but he knew he was on the right path. Chapter 4. Problems in Lilliput. Gulliver had become a hero in Lilliput after his daring capture of the Blefuscudian fleet. The Lilliputians celebrated him and appreciated his strength and bravery. However, new challenges soon arose that tested Gulliver's loyalty and wisdom. One morning, Gulliver was summoned to the Emperor's palace. The Emperor looked worried and told Gulliver that Blefuscu had not given up. Despite their fleet being captured, they were planning a new attack. This time, they were building secret weapons to defeat the Lilliputians. The Emperor asked Gulliver to help once again. Gulliver agreed, determined to protect his friends. He began by inspecting the defences of Lilliput. He noticed that the city walls were strong, but could be improved. Gulliver suggested building additional fortifications and digging a deep moat around the city. The Lilliputians worked hard, following Gulliver's instructions. While preparing for the possible attack, Gulliver faced new challenges. Some of the emperor's ministers were still jealous of him. They whispered among themselves, plotting to turn the emperor against Gulliver. They told the emperor that Gulliver might use his strength to take over Lilliput and become its ruler. One of the ministers, a cunning man named Flimnap, spread rumors that Gulliver was a spy for Blefuscu. He told the emperor that Gulliver's friendship with the Lilliputians was just a trick to gain their trust. Gulliver, unaware of these plots, continued to help the Lilliputians with their defenses. One day, while Gulliver was inspecting the city walls, a group of soldiers approached him. They were led by Reldresal, who looked troubled. "Gulliver," Reldresal said, "there are people who doubt your loyalty. They say you are a spy for Blefuscu. I don't believe them, but you must be careful." Gulliver was shocked and hurt by these accusations. He had done nothing but help the Lilliputians. He realized he needed to prove his loyalty once more. Gulliver decided to confront the emperor directly. He explained his innocence and asked for a chance to show his loyalty. The emperor listened carefully. He knew Gulliver had helped them greatly, but was also influenced by his ministers' whispers. The emperor gave Gulliver one last chance. He asked Gulliver to lead a mission to destroy the secret weapons that Blefuscu was building. Gulliver accepted the challenge. He set off at night, wading through the sea to reach Blefuscu. When he arrived, he saw the weapons, large catapults and siege machines. Gulliver worked quickly, dismantling the weapons piece by piece. The Blefuscudians tried to stop him, but Gulliver's size and strength made it impossible. By morning, Gulliver had destroyed all the secret weapons. He returned to Lilliput, tired but victorious. The emperor was relieved and praised Gulliver for his bravery and loyalty. The ministers who had doubted Gulliver were silenced. Gulliver had proven once again that he was a true friend to the Lilliputians. Despite the victory, Gulliver felt uneasy. He realized that even in this land of tiny people, there were big problems. Jealousy and distrust could easily turn friends into enemies. Gulliver decided to be more cautious and stay true to his values. As Gulliver lay in his temple that night, he thought about the challenges he had faced. He knew that more tests were ahead, but he was determined to face them with courage and wisdom. Gulliver's adventure in Lilliput was teaching him important lessons about trust, loyalty, and the complexities of human nature. Chapter 5. Escape to Blefuscu. Gulliver had become a hero in Lilliput, but he also knew that not everyone trusted him. Despite his efforts to help, some ministers still saw him as a threat. Flimnap, the cunning minister, continued to spread lies and plot against Gulliver. He convinced the emperor that Gulliver might use his great size to overthrow the government. One night, Gulliver overheard a secret meeting. Flimnap and his followers were planning to arrest Gulliver and charge him with treason. They wanted to blind him and starve him to death. Gulliver knew he had to escape before it was too late. He decided to flee to Blefuscu, the rival island nation. Even though Blefuscu was an enemy of Lilliput, Gulliver hoped they would treat him better. He waited until nightfall and quietly made his way to the shore. Gulliver waded through the sea, heading towards Blefuscu. The journey was long and exhausting, but he finally reached the island by dawn. The Blefuscudians were surprised to see Gulliver. They had heard stories about the giant man who had captured their fleet, but they did not know what to expect. Gulliver raised his hands to show he meant no harm. He spoke calmly, explaining that he was fleeing from injustice in Lilliput and sought asylum in Blefuscu. The Emperor of Blefuscu welcomed Gulliver. He offered him food, clothing, and a place to stay. The Blefuscudians treated Gulliver with kindness and respect. They were curious about him, and asked many questions about his homeland and his adventures. Gulliver spent several weeks in Blefuscu, recovering from his ordeal. He explored the island and learned about its people and their customs. The Blefuscudians were similar to the Lilliputians, but had their own unique culture. Gulliver was grateful for their hospitality and felt at peace for the first time in months. One day, while walking along the shore, Gulliver spotted something on the horizon. It was a ship. He waved his arms and shouted, hoping to catch the crew's attention. The ship changed course and sailed towards him. As it came closer, Gulliver could see that it was an English ship. The captain of the ship was amazed to see Gulliver. He listened to Gulliver's story with great interest. The captain agreed to take Gulliver back to England. Gulliver thanked the Emperor of Blefuscu and the people for their kindness. He promised to remember them and speak well of their island. Gulliver boarded the ship and set sail for home. As the ship sailed away, he looked back at the tiny island of Blefuscu, feeling a mix of gratitude and relief. He was finally going home after a long and incredible journey. The voyage to England was smooth and uneventful. Gulliver spent his days on the deck, watching the sea and thinking about his adventures. He realized how much he had learned from the tiny people of Lilliput and Blefuscu. They had taught him about bravery, loyalty, and the importance of kindness. When Gulliver finally arrived in England, he was welcomed by his family and friends. They were amazed by his stories and adventures. Gulliver felt happy to be home, but he knew that his desire for exploration and discovery would never fade. He promised himself that he would continue to seek out new adventures and learn more about the world. As he settled back into his life in England, Gulliver felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had escaped danger, made new friends, and seen incredible things. His journey had changed him forever, and he was ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. Chapter 6. A New Journey. After some time back in England, Gulliver's longing for adventure returned. He had experienced so much in Lilliput and Blefuscu, but his curiosity about the world was far from satisfied. He decided to set off on another voyage, hoping to discover new lands and meet more fascinating people. Gulliver found a position as a ship's doctor on a vessel called the Adventure. The ship was bound for India, a land of rich cultures and spices. The crew was experienced, and the captain was a wise and kind man, named Captain John Pritchard. Gulliver felt optimistic about this new journey. The Adventure sailed smoothly for several weeks. Gulliver spent his days treating the crew, studying the stars and reading about navigation. He enjoyed the camaraderie of the sailors and the fresh sea air. However, one fateful night, the weather changed dramatically. A violent storm struck the ship, much like the one that had shipwrecked him before. The waves were enormous, and the wind howled fiercely. The Adventure was tossed about like a toy in a bathtub. Despite the crew's best efforts, the ship crashed onto a massive rock and broke apart. Gulliver was thrown into the sea, clinging to a piece of wood as the storm raged around him. After hours of struggling in the water, Gulliver finally washed ashore on an unfamiliar coast. Exhausted, he collapsed on the beach and fell into a deep sleep. When he awoke, the sun was shining, and he felt the warmth on his skin. He sat up and looked around, trying to understand where he was. To his amazement, Gulliver found himself in a land where everything was enormous. The grass was as tall as trees, and the flowers were bigger than he had ever seen. He realized that he was in Brobdingnag, a land of giants. As Gulliver explored this strange new world, he saw a giant farmer approaching. The farmer was astonished to see such a tiny man. He gently picked Gulliver up and placed him in his pocket. Gulliver felt like a doll in the farmer's huge hands. The farmer took Gulliver to his home, where his family gathered around to see the tiny visitor. The farmer's daughter, Glumdalclitch, was particularly fascinated by Gulliver. She was a kind and gentle girl who took great care of him. She made him a small bed and clothes from scraps of fabric. Glumdalclitch treated Gulliver like a beloved pet, always making sure he was comfortable and safe. Gulliver quickly learned the language of Brobdingnag. The giants were amazed by his intelligence and ability to speak their tongue. Gulliver shared stories of his homeland and his adventures in Lilliput. The giants listened with great interest, marveling at the tales of tiny people and their customs. Despite their kindness, life in Brobdingnag was challenging for Gulliver. Everyday objects became dangerous obstacles. He had to be careful not to get stepped on or lost. The giant's food was too large for him to eat, so Glumdalclitch prepared special meals for him. One day, the farmer decided to take Gulliver to the royal palace, hoping to present him to the queen. The queen was delighted by Gulliver and immediately took a liking to him. She appointed Glumdalclitch as his caretaker and gave them a special room in the palace. Gulliver's life at the palace was both fascinating and difficult. He enjoyed the queen's company and learned much about Brobdingnag's culture and politics. However, he often felt homesick and overwhelmed by the giant's world. As Gulliver lay in his tiny bed one night, he wondered if he would ever return to England. His new journey had brought him to incredible places and taught him valuable lessons. Despite the challenges, he remained hopeful and curious about what the future held. Chapter 7. The Land of Giants. Gulliver had now settled into life in Brobdingnag, a land of giants. Each day brought new surprises and discoveries. Everything in Brobdingnag was enormous compared to Gulliver. The people, the animals, the buildings, and even the smallest objects were all gigantic. As Gulliver explored this fascinating land, he took careful notes about the giant inhabitants and their way of life. The giants of Brobdingnag were gentle and kind. They were astonished by Gulliver's small size and treated him with great care. Gulliver was particularly grateful to Glumdalclitch, the farmer's daughter, who looked after him as if he were a fragile doll. She carried him in a specially made box and made sure he was safe at all times. The people of Brobdingnag were tall and strong, with simple and honest faces. They lived in large houses made of stone, with doors that reached up to the sky. Inside these houses, the furniture was vast and sturdy. Tables were as high as mountains, and chairs were big enough to be small houses for Gulliver. Gulliver was fascinated by the giants' daily life. They worked hard in the fields, growing crops that were bigger than any he had ever seen. The farmers used huge tools to plough the land and harvest the crops. The food in Brobdingnag was delicious, but difficult for Gulliver to eat because of its size. Glumdalclitch often cut his food into tiny pieces so he could enjoy it. The giants were also very curious about Gulliver. They asked him many questions about his homeland, England. They wanted to know about the people, the government, and the way of life there. Gulliver told them stories of England's cities, the ships, and the adventures he had experienced. The giants listened with great interest, amazed by the differences between their world and Gulliver's. One of the most impressive places in Brobdingnag was the royal palace. The Queen had taken a special interest in Gulliver and often invited him to spend time with her. The palace was a magnificent building with tall towers and vast halls. The Queen's throne room was adorned with golden decorations and beautiful tapestries. Gulliver felt honoured to be in such a grand place. In his conversations with the Queen, Gulliver learned much about the culture and politics of Brobdingnag. The giants valued simplicity and honesty. Their laws were straightforward, and their leaders were chosen based on wisdom and integrity. The queen herself was a fair and just ruler, loved by her people. Despite the kindness of the giants, Gulliver faced many challenges in Brobdingnag. The sheer size of everything made everyday tasks difficult. He had to be careful not to get lost or injured. Once, a giant cat nearly mistook him for a toy. Another time, a bird tried to snatch him away. Each day was an adventure, filled with both wonder and danger. Gulliver also missed his home and family. While the giants were friendly, he often felt lonely and out of place. He longed for the familiar sights and sounds of England. Yet he knew that his time in Brobdingnag was a unique opportunity to learn and grow. As the days passed, Gulliver continued to observe and document the life of the giants. He marveled at their strength and simplicity. Their way of life was different from anything he had known, but it was also peaceful and harmonious. Gulliver realized that despite their size, the giants of Brobdingnag had much to teach him about kindness and humanity. Gulliver's adventure in the land of giants was far from over. He knew that more discoveries and challenges awaited him. As he lay in his tiny bed, carefully crafted by Glumdalclitch, he felt a mix of excitement and curiosity about what the future would bring. Chapter 8. Life in Brobdingnag. Living among the giants of Brobdingnag was an extraordinary experience for Gulliver. Each day brought new challenges and wonders. He learned to navigate this enormous world with the help of his kind caretaker, Glumdalclitch, and found that the giants had a way of life that was both fascinating and instructive. The Queen of Brobdingnag took a particular interest in Gulliver. She was a wise and benevolent ruler, admired by her people for her fairness and kindness. She invited Gulliver to spend time in the palace, where he could observe and learn about the customs and traditions of the Brobdingnagians. The giants' daily life was centered around simplicity and hard work. They were farmers, artisans, and laborers who valued honesty and integrity. Gulliver admired their straightforward approach to life and their dedication to their community. The Brobdingnagians believed in the importance of family and often gathered for large meals where they shared stories and laughter. Gulliver was particularly fascinated by their festivals. One such festival was the harvest celebration, which marked the end of the farming season. The entire community participated in this joyous event. There were music, dancing, and feasting. The giants played large instruments that produced deep, resonant sounds, and their dances were graceful despite their size. Gulliver enjoyed watching these festivities from a safe spot, marveling at the harmony and happiness that filled the air. The Queen was eager to learn about Gulliver's homeland and often invited him to her private chambers to hear his stories. Gulliver described England's cities, its people, and its customs. The Queen listened with great interest, asking many questions about the government and society of Gulliver's world. She was particularly intrigued by the concept of tiny ships sailing vast oceans and the intricate details of English politics. In return, the Queen shared the history and culture of Brobdingnag with Gulliver. She explained that their society was built on principles of fairness and mutual respect. The laws were simple but strictly enforced, ensuring that everyone lived in harmony. The Queen herself led by example, demonstrating compassion and wisdom in her rulings. Gulliver also spent time learning about the giants' crafts and skills. He watched blacksmiths forge enormous tools and artisans create beautiful, oversized pottery. The giants used their size to their advantage, building structures that were both grand and functional. Gulliver was impressed by their ingenuity and creativity. Despite the kindness and hospitality of the giants, Gulliver faced many challenges. The world of Brobdingnag was not built for someone his size, and everyday tasks were often perilous. He had to be cautious of giant animals and avoid getting lost in the vast landscapes. Glumdalclitch was always by his side, ensuring his safety and well-being. She made special accommodations for him, like a small house within her own room and tiny utensils for his meals. One day, while exploring the palace gardens, Gulliver encountered a group of curious children. They were fascinated by his small size and wanted to play with him. Gulliver found himself being passed around like a toy, which was both frightening and amusing. Glumdalclitch quickly intervened, scolding the children and reminding them to be gentle. As Gulliver adjusted to life in Brobdingnag, he developed a deep appreciation for the giants' way of life. Their emphasis on simplicity, honesty, and community was a refreshing contrast to the complexities of his own world. He realized that there was much to learn from these gentle giants, and he felt grateful for the opportunity to live among them. Gulliver's time in Brobdingnag was filled with new experiences and insights. He saw the world from a different perspective and gained a deeper understanding of humanity. As he lay in his tiny bed, carefully made by Glumdalclitch, he reflected on the lessons he had learned and the adventures that still awaited him in this land of giants. Chapter 9. Trouble with Giants. Life in Brobdingnag was an ongoing adventure for Gulliver. While the giants were kind and curious, his small size presented constant challenges. Each day, he navigated a world that was not built for someone as tiny as he was, learning to adapt to the enormous scale of everything around him. One of the biggest difficulties Gulliver faced was simply getting around. The palace was a vast maze of giant rooms and towering hallways. Glumdalclitch, his devoted caretaker, always carried him in a specially made box to keep him safe. Despite her careful attention, there were moments when Gulliver felt overwhelmed by the sheer size of everything. He missed the ease of moving freely in a world built for his own dimensions. Meals were another challenge. The giant's food, while delicious, was served in portions too large for Gulliver to handle. Glumdalclitch helped by cutting his food into tiny pieces and providing him with small utensils. Still, the sight of enormous fruits and vegetables was daunting. Gulliver often felt like a child in a world of giants, struggling to manage the simplest tasks. One day, a new threat emerged. While exploring the palace gardens, Gulliver encountered a giant cat. To the cat, Gulliver was no more than a plaything. It batted him around with its enormous paws, treating him like a toy. Terrified, Gulliver tried to defend himself, but his small size made it impossible. Fortunately, Glumdalclitch arrived just in time to rescue him, scolding the cat and scooping Gulliver into her protective hands. Despite such dangers, Gulliver continued to learn about the giant's way of life. He attended court sessions with the Queen, where he observed the Brobdingnagians' simple but effective legal system. The giants valued honesty and fairness, and their disputes were resolved with wisdom and compassion. Gulliver admired their straightforward approach to justice, which was less complicated than the legal systems he knew in Europe. However, not all giants were friendly. Some were jealous of the attention Gulliver received from the Queen and other nobles. They saw him as an oddity rather than a person and treated him with disdain. One particular noble, Lord Fumeluck, often mocked Gulliver's size and tried to make him feel insignificant. Gulliver's patience was tested as he dealt with such prejudice, but he maintained his dignity and continued to prove his worth through his actions. The biggest challenge came from nature itself. One afternoon, While Gulliver was resting in his small house within Glumdalclitch's room, a sudden earthquake-like tremor shook the palace. It was actually a giant sneeze, but to Gulliver it felt like a natural disaster. His house was toppled over, and he was thrown across the room. Thankfully, Glumdalclitch was there to pick him up and ensure he was unharmed. These constant dangers made Gulliver realize that living in Brobdingnag, despite its wonders, was becoming increasingly perilous. He missed the safety and familiarity of his own world. His adventures had taught him much, but he longed for the comfort of a place where he did not have to fear being crushed or eaten. One day, as Gulliver was pondering his situation, a remarkable opportunity presented itself. A giant eagle swooped down into the garden where Gulliver was sitting. The eagle grabbed the box in which Gulliver was sitting and soared high into the sky. For a moment, Gulliver was terrified, but he quickly saw this as a chance to escape the land of giants. The eagle carried him over the sea before dropping the box into the water. Gulliver's box floated, and he was eventually rescued by a passing ship. The sailors were astonished by his tales of Brobdingnag and treated him with great care. Gulliver was relieved to be back among people his own size, though he would always remember the giants and the lessons he learned from them. As he sailed back to England, Gulliver reflected on his time in Brobdingnag. Despite the troubles he faced, he was grateful for the kindness of the giants, especially Glumdalclitch. He knew that his adventures were far from over, and he looked forward to whatever new journeys awaited him. Chapter 10. A New Discovery. After returning to England and spending some time with his family, Gulliver's adventurous spirit soon beckoned him back to the sea. He joined another voyage, this time on a ship called the Hopewell, bound for unknown territories. Little did he know, this journey would lead him to the most extraordinary place he had ever seen. Several weeks into the voyage, the Hopewell encountered a fierce storm. The ship was tossed about by enormous waves and strong winds. Despite the crew's best efforts, the ship was damaged, and Gulliver found himself once again cast adrift in a small lifeboat. For days, Gulliver drifted on the open sea, surviving on the remnants of his provisions. Just as he began to lose hope, he spotted something unusual on the horizon. It was a large shadow, blocking out part of the sky. As he drew closer, Gulliver realized that it was a floating island, suspended high above the sea. Amazed and curious, Gulliver rowed towards the island. As he approached, he saw that it was inhabited by people. They lowered a rope, and Gulliver was pulled up to the floating island of Laputa. The Laputians welcomed him warmly and provided him with food and clothing. Gulliver was struck by their peculiar appearance. They all had heads that tilted to one side or the other, and eyes that seemed to be in constant motion. The Laputians were a race of scholars and inventors, obsessed with mathematics and music. Their island floated above the ground because of a giant magnetic rock at its center. The Laputians could control the island's movements by manipulating this rock. They used their floating island to monitor and control the lands below. Gulliver quickly learned that the Laputians were deeply engrossed in their studies. They spent their days conducting complex experiments and engaging in philosophical debates. However, their intense focus on intellectual pursuits often left them oblivious to the practical matters of daily life. Their clothes were poorly made, and their houses were in disrepair. Despite their intellectual prowess, the Laputians had little common sense. Gulliver found their way of life both fascinating and bewildering. They communicated using a language filled with mathematical terms and musical notes. To help them focus, they employed servants called flappers, who would tap them with a small stick whenever their attention wandered. Gulliver was particularly intrigued by the Laputians' scientific experiments. They showed him their astronomical observatories, where they studied the stars and planets. The Laputians believed they could predict the future by observing celestial movements. However, their predictions were often inaccurate, leading to frequent debates and revisions. One day, Gulliver was invited to visit the Academy of Lagado, located on the ground below Laputa. The Academy was the center of Laputian innovation, where scholars worked on various inventions and experiments. Gulliver was eager to see this place and learn more about their advancements. At the Academy, Gulliver was shown many strange and wonderful inventions. There were machines designed to extract sunlight from cucumbers, devices to turn ice into gunpowder, and projects to build houses from the roof down. While these ideas were imaginative, most of them were impractical and had little real-world application. Gulliver also met with the people of Balnibarbi, the land below Laputa. Unlike the Laputians, the Balnibarbians were practical and hard-working. They admired the Laputians' intelligence, but found their inventions useless. Gulliver realized that a balance between intellect and practicality was essential for a harmonious society. As his time in Laputa came to an end, Gulliver reflected on the unique experiences he had. The floating island of Laputa had shown him the wonders of human ingenuity, but also the pitfalls of neglecting everyday realities. He thanked the Laputians for their hospitality and prepared to return to the Hopewell, eager to share his discoveries. Gulliver's journey to Laputa had broadened his understanding of the world. He had seen how different societies prioritized different values and learned that balance was key. As he set sail once again, Gulliver looked forward to his next adventure, knowing that every new discovery brought valuable lessons. Chapter 11. The Strangest Place. Gulliver had now spent several weeks on the floating island of Laputa, and every day was filled with new surprises. The Laputians were unlike any people he had ever encountered. Their entire existence revolved around mathematics, music, and abstract thinking. Gulliver found their habits peculiar and their way of life both fascinating and strange. One of the most unusual things about the Laputians was their appearance. They all had heads that tilted to one side, and their eyes seemed to be constantly in motion, one looking upward and the other downward. This was because they were always lost in thought, contemplating complex theories and equations. Their clothing was equally odd, adorned with celestial symbols and musical notes, reflecting their scholarly interests. The Laputians had a unique method of communication. They often spoke in a mix of mathematical terms and musical phrases. Their conversations were like elaborate puzzles, and Gulliver had to concentrate hard to understand them. He quickly learned that the Laputians valued intellectual pursuits above all else, often to the detriment of practical matters. For instance, the Laputians were so absorbed in their studies that they neglected their physical needs. Their houses were poorly built and frequently in disrepair because they paid little attention to construction or maintenance. Meals were often simple and unappetizing because cooking was seen as a lowly task compared to the grandeur of mathematical discovery. To help the Laputians focus, they employed servants called flappers. These flappers carried small sticks with soft bladders at the end. Whenever a Laputian's mind began to wander during a conversation or task, the flapper would gently tap them on the mouth or ears to bring them back to the present moment. Gulliver found this custom both amusing and practical, as it allowed the Laputians to stay somewhat engaged with the world around them. Despite their odd habits, the Laputians were friendly and welcoming to Gulliver. They were eager to share their knowledge and show him their many inventions. Gulliver spent hours in their observatories, marveling at the intricate instruments they used to study the stars and planets. The Laputians believed that understanding the heavens could reveal the secrets of the universe, and they devoted much of their time to astronomical research. However, not all of their inventions were practical. Gulliver saw many bizarre and impractical devices in the Academy of Lagado, where the Laputians conducted their experiments. There were machines designed to extract sunbeams from cucumbers and contraptions to soften marble for use in building. While these inventions were creative, they often had little real-world application. Gulliver also noticed that the Laputians were frequently anxious and worried. They lived in constant fear of catastrophic events, such as the collapse of the sun or the shifting of the stars. This fear stemmed from their deep understanding of astronomy and their tendency to overanalyze natural phenomena. As a result, the Laputians were always on edge, preparing for disasters that never came. One of the most striking features of Laputa was its ability to float and move across the sky. The island was controlled by a giant magnetic rock at its center, which the Laputians could manipulate to steer the island in any direction. This allowed them to hover over different parts of the land below and monitor the activities of their subjects. The Laputians used this power to maintain control over the people of Balnibarbi, who lived on the ground below. Despite the Laputians' peculiarities, Gulliver grew fond of them. He admired their intellectual curiosity and their dedication to knowledge. However, he also recognized the limitations of their way of life. The Laputians' focus on abstract thought often left them disconnected from the practical realities of the world. Gulliver realized that a balance between intellectual pursuits and everyday life was essential for a harmonious existence. As his time in Laputa came to an end, Gulliver reflected on the many lessons he had learned. The floating island and its strange inhabitants had shown him the value of curiosity and the importance of grounding one's knowledge in practical experience. Gulliver thanked the Laputians for their hospitality and prepared to continue his journey, eager to discover what other wonders the world had in store. Chapter 12. Laputa's Secrets. Gulliver continued his exploration of the floating island of Laputa, delving deeper into its advanced technologies and their impact on society. The Laputians were proud of their inventions, and they were eager to show Gulliver the marvels of their technological prowess. One of the first secrets Gulliver discovered was the island's ability to float and move through the air. The entire island was supported by a giant magnetic rock at its center. The Laputians had mastered the art of manipulating magnetic fields, allowing them to steer the island in any direction. This technology gave them a unique advantage, enabling them to monitor and control the lands below. The Laputians used their floating island to maintain power over the people of Balnibarbi, who lived on the ground. If the inhabitants of Balnibarbi rebelled or refused to pay tribute, the Laputians would hover Laputa over their cities, blocking out the sun and causing great distress. This method of control was highly effective, though it often led to resentment and fear among the Balnibarbians. Gulliver was fascinated by the Laputians' use of astronomical instruments. They had developed advanced telescopes and observatories, allowing them to study the stars and planets in great detail. The Laputians believed that the movements of celestial bodies could predict future events and influence their daily lives. They spent countless hours charting the heavens and making intricate calculations. One of the most impressive devices Gulliver saw was the flying machine. This contraption, powered by magnetic forces, allowed individual Laputians to fly short distances. The flying machine was a symbol of their technological advancement and ingenuity. Gulliver marveled at the sight of Laputians gliding gracefully through the air, using the machine to travel from place to place. Despite their technological achievements, Gulliver noticed that the Laputians' obsession with science had significant drawbacks. They were so absorbed in their studies that they often neglected practical matters. Their houses were poorly maintained, and their clothing was shabby. Basic tasks, such as cooking and cleaning, were seen as unimportant compared to the grandeur of scientific discovery. Gulliver also observed that the Laputians' intense focus on intellectual pursuits had a negative impact on their health. Many of them were frail and weak, suffering from various ailments caused by lack of physical activity and poor diet. Their minds were sharp, but their bodies were neglected. Gulliver realized that a balanced life, one that included both mental and physical well-being, was essential. One day, Gulliver was invited to visit the Academy of Lagado, where the Laputians conducted their most ambitious experiments. The Academy was a hub of innovation, filled with scholars working on a wide range of projects. Gulliver was shown devices that could make plants grow faster, machines that could extract sunlight from cucumbers, and inventions designed to solve complex mathematical problems. While some of these inventions were impressive, many were impractical. Gulliver saw that the Laputians often pursued ideas without considering their real-world applications. They were more interested in theoretical knowledge than in practical solutions. This approach led to many failed experiments and wasted resources. Despite these shortcomings, Gulliver admired the Laputians' dedication to knowledge and their relentless pursuit of discovery. He understood that their technological advancements had the potential to bring great benefits to society, but they needed to find a balance between intellectual pursuits and everyday life. As Gulliver prepared to leave Laputa, he reflected on the lessons he had learned. The Laputians had shown him the wonders of technology and the importance of curiosity and innovation. However, they also taught him the value of practicality and the need for a balanced life. Gulliver thanked the Laputians for their hospitality and set sail for new adventures, eager to see what other secrets the world had to offer. Gulliver's time in Laputa had expanded his understanding of science and society. He realized that while technological progress was important, it should not come at the expense of practical living and personal well-being. As he sailed away, Gulliver felt a renewed sense of purpose, ready to explore and learn from the diverse cultures and technologies of the world. Chapter 13. Return Home. After many incredible adventures, Gulliver felt it was time to return home to England. He had journeyed through strange lands, met fascinating people, and learned more about the world than he ever imagined. Now he longed for the familiar comforts of home and the embrace of his family. Gulliver boarded a merchant ship bound for England. As the ship sailed away from Laputa, he looked back at the floating island, reflecting on the remarkable experiences he had there. The Laputians' advanced technologies and unique way of life had taught him valuable lessons about the balance between intellectual pursuits and practical living. The voyage back to England was long but peaceful. Gulliver spent his days on deck, gazing at the vast ocean and thinking about his travels. He remembered the tiny people of Lilliput and their intricate political struggles. He thought of the giants of Brobdingnag who showed him the importance of kindness and simplicity. And he recalled the Laputians, whose brilliance and obsession with science had both impressed and puzzled him. Each encounter had taught Gulliver something new about human nature and society. He realized that every culture, no matter how different, had its own strengths and weaknesses. These reflections made him more appreciative of the diversity in the world and more aware of the common threads that connected all people. As the ship neared the English coast, Gulliver felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He wondered how much had changed during his absence and how his family would react to his stories. Would they believe the incredible tales of tiny people, giants, and floating islands? Gulliver knew that some might find his adventures hard to believe, but he was determined to share what he had learned. When the ship finally docked, Gulliver stepped onto English soil with a sense of relief and joy. He made his way home, his heart pounding with anticipation. As he approached his house, he saw his wife and children waiting for him. Their faces lit up with happiness, and they ran to greet him. Gulliver embraced his family, feeling the warmth and love he had missed so much. He was home at last. Over the next few days, he settled back into his routine, enjoying the simple pleasures of home life. He took long walks in the countryside, savored home-cooked meals, and spent time with his children, telling them stories of his adventures. At first, some of Gulliver's friends and neighbors were skeptical of his tales. They found it hard to believe that such extraordinary places and people existed. But as Gulliver shared more details and answered their questions, many began to see the truth in his words. They marveled at his courage and the breadth of his experiences. Gulliver's travels had changed him in profound ways. He had seen the world from many perspectives and learned to appreciate the diversity of human life. He understood the importance of kindness, humility, and open-mindedness. These lessons stayed with him as he resumed his life in England. In the evenings, Gulliver often sat by the fireplace, reflecting on his journeys. He knew that his adventures had not only expanded his knowledge, but also deepened his understanding of himself and others. He felt grateful for the opportunities he had been given and the wisdom he had gained. As Gulliver looked to the future, he knew that his desire for exploration and discovery would never fade. While he was content to be home for now, he remained open to the possibility of new adventures. The world was vast and full of mysteries, and Gulliver was ready to explore them, armed with the lessons he had learned from his travels. Gulliver's return home marked the end of one journey, but the beginning of another. He was a traveler at heart, always seeking to learn and grow. With his family by his side and the world before him, Gulliver was ready for whatever the future held. Chapter 14. Planning the Final Voyage. After spending some time at home with his family, Gulliver felt the familiar call of the sea once again. Despite his contentment in England, he knew that his adventures were not yet complete. The urge to explore new lands and discover unknown cultures was too strong to ignore. With a mix of excitement and apprehension, Gulliver began to plan his final voyage. Gulliver's experiences had taught him the importance of thorough preparation. He spent weeks gathering supplies, studying maps, and consulting with experienced sailors. He wanted to ensure that this journey would be successful and safe. Gulliver also took the time to write down his previous adventures, hoping that others could learn from his experiences. As the day of departure approached, Gulliver felt a range of emotions. He was eager to set sail and explore new horizons, but he also felt a deep sense of apprehension. He knew that this voyage could bring great discoveries, but it could also bring unforeseen dangers. Gulliver's family shared his mixed feelings. They were proud of his courage and curiosity, but worried about the risks he might face. Gulliver's wife, Mary, was especially concerned. She had seen him return from his previous voyages with incredible stories, but also with signs of hardship and struggle. "Are you sure about this, Lemuel?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fireplace. "You've already seen so much. Do you really need to go again? Gulliver took her hand and looked into her eyes. I understand your worries, Mary, but I feel that there is still so much to learn and discover. This will be my final voyage, and I promise to return safely. The knowledge I gain could benefit many. Mary nodded, though she still felt uneasy. Just promise me you'll be careful, she said softly. I promise, Gulliver replied, giving her a reassuring smile. The night before his departure, Gulliver couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, thinking about the adventures that awaited him and the challenges he might face. He wondered what new lands he would discover and what lessons he would learn. Despite his apprehension, Gulliver felt a sense of excitement and purpose. He knew that this journey was an essential part of who he was. On the morning of his departure, Gulliver's family and friends gathered at the dock to see him off. The ship, the Adventure, was ready to set sail, and the crew was busy with final preparations. Gulliver hugged his children and kissed Mary goodbye, promising to write and return as soon as he could. As the ship sailed away from the dock, Gulliver stood on the deck, watching the shore recede into the distance. He felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. He knew he would miss his family, but he was also eager to embrace the unknown. The first few days at sea were calm and uneventful. Gulliver spent his time getting to know the crew and familiarizing himself with the ship. He shared stories of his previous voyages, and the sailors listened with great interest. They respected Gulliver for his experience and wisdom, and felt fortunate to have him on board. As the Adventure sailed further into uncharted waters, Gulliver's excitement grew. He felt a sense of freedom and possibility that he had always cherished. The open sea represented endless opportunities for discovery and learning. Gulliver knew that this final voyage would be different from all the others. He felt a deeper sense of purpose and a stronger connection to the world around him. He was determined to make the most of this journey, to explore new lands, and to gain insights that would enrich his understanding of the world. With the wind in his sails and the horizon before him, Gulliver looked forward to the adventures that awaited. He was ready to face whatever challenges came his way, knowing that each experience would bring new wisdom and understanding. This final voyage was not just a journey across the sea, but a journey of the mind and spirit. Chapter 15. The Last Adventure. Gulliver's final voyage led him to the most extraordinary place he had ever visited. After months at sea, the Adventure encountered a violent storm that left Gulliver shipwrecked once more. When he awoke, he found himself on the shore of a strange and beautiful land. This was the land of the Houyhnhnms. The Houyhnhnms were unlike any beings Gulliver had encountered. They were intelligent, graceful horses who lived in a peaceful and orderly society. Unlike humans, they had no concept of lying or deceit. Their lives were governed by reason and logic, and they valued harmony above all else. As Gulliver explored this new land, he was amazed by the Houyhnhnms' way of life. They lived simply, without the need for money or possessions. Their society was built on mutual respect and understanding, and there was no crime or conflict. Gulliver felt a deep sense of peace among them, something he had never experienced in any other land. Gulliver was welcomed by a wise and kind Houyhnhnm, who became his guide and teacher. This Houyhnhnm helped Gulliver learn their language and understand their customs. Through these lessons, Gulliver discovered that the Houyhnhnms saw humans, whom they called Yahoos, as inferior and brutish creatures. In this land, Yahoos were wild, savage beings who lived in the forests and caused trouble for the Houyhnhnms. Gulliver was initially hurt by this comparison, but he soon realized that the Houyhnhnms had a point. Reflecting on his own society, he saw the greed, violence, and dishonesty that often characterized human behavior. He began to appreciate the Houyhnhnms' rational and peaceful way of life. Living among the Houyhnhnms, Gulliver adopted their habits and values. He learned to live simply, focusing on the essentials and finding joy in nature and companionship. The Houyhnhnms taught him the importance of truth and integrity, and Gulliver found himself becoming more thoughtful and introspective. Despite the peace he found in this land, Gulliver knew that his time among the Houyhnhnms could not last forever. The Houyhnhnms, though kind, believed that it was unnatural for a Yahoo like Gulliver to live among them. They decided that Gulliver must leave their land and return to his own kind. Gulliver was heartbroken by this decision, but he understood their reasoning. He thanked the Houyhnhnms for their hospitality and the profound lessons they had taught him. They helped him build a small boat, and with a heavy heart, Gulliver set sail once more, leaving the land of the Houyhnhnms behind. As he sailed away, Gulliver reflected on his last adventure. The Houyhnhnms had shown him a way of life that was pure and rational, free from the corruption and conflicts of human society. He felt a deep gratitude for the peace and understanding he had found among them. Eventually, Gulliver was rescued by a passing ship and returned to England. He was reunited with his family, but he was forever changed by his experiences. He found it difficult to readjust to human society, which now seemed coarse and irrational compared to the serene life of the Houyhnhnms. Gulliver spent his days quietly, reflecting on the wisdom he had gained from his travels. He wrote down his adventures, hoping to share the lessons he had learned with others. Though he struggled to relate to those around him, he found solace in the knowledge that he had glimpsed a better way of life. In the end, Gulliver realized that his journey had been about more than just discovering new lands. It had been a journey of self-discovery, teaching him the importance of truth, integrity, and peace. He knew that he would carry the lessons of the Houyhnhnms with him for the rest of his life, finding peace and understanding in their simple, rational way of living.